let us know. Okay, good. Okay, so we have Mark. We've got
The closed captioning is not on.
oh,
Okay, there it goes. Thanks.
okay, we're good. All right, it is 4:12 p.m. We will call this meeting to order. And I certainly do acknowledge with respect that we are in the Robinson Huron Treaty Territory and that the land on which we are gathered is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and known as Wawating. Wawating is the home of Garden River First Nation, Batchewana First Nation, and the historic Sault Ste. Marie Métis Council. The next item on our agenda is adoption of our minutes. If I could have someone to move and second the minutes of our August 11th meeting. Oh God, I'll do this differently now. All right, thank you, Pedro, and thank you. I need a seconder, please. Andre, thank you. Any additions, deletions, discussion on those minutes, and seeing none, all in favor of approval of those minutes, that is carried. Does anyone have a declaration of pecuniary interest for on any of the agenda items on today's meeting? Seeing none, thank you. Now moving to adoption of the agenda. Could I have someone to move and to second adoption of the agenda? Pedro and Jamie, thank you. We have, in terms of additions, deletions, or changes, we have just simply reorganized, or we are going to reorganize, or like your permission to reorganize the meeting. We're going to move to options, or item 7 next, which would be the presentation on the active transportation master plan. And then we'll move to item 6, which is the Green Initiatives Program Review, and then we'll move on to item 8 and the balance of the items on the agenda. Any concerns about that or anything further? Any other? Seeing none. All right, so be it resolved, the agenda is as has been edited and presented is approved. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. All right. So let's move along to very exciting things here. it'll be after the minute. Perfect. Thank you. Okay. So we're moving on to an initial presentation on our city's new active transportation master plan. We're going to start with an overview by Steve Turco, who's a senior planner here at the City of Sault Ste. Marie. Justin Jones is joining us here. Welcome, Justin, from WSP, who's the consultant that is working on the plan. Steve's going to do an introduction. Justin is going to take us through some information, and then depending on time available, we have a few other things we'd like to accomplish today. This is an introduction for us, and we'll be coming back to this at our next meeting. So Steve, if you kindly take it away. Thank you.
As Donna mentioned, my name is Steve Turco. I'm a senior planner with the City of Sault Ste. Marie. And I thought, just as an introduction, what I could do is just sort of provide a little bit of context on why the city is developing an active transportation master plan. I think historically, and there's been a few people in this room that have been part of the conversation in the past. Historically, the efforts have sort of been around cycling and cycling infrastructure. Maybe if I could just get the mouse there. So maybe as a quick introductory question, does everyone sort of have an understanding of maybe the distinction between active transportation and other forms of transportation? I don't know if anyone wants to sort of take a crack at that.
We've spoken a lot about it at this committee.
Okay.
Something that everyone's quite passionate about.
Sure.
So
okay.
You've got a lot of experts at the table.
Fair enough, and that's great. So just really to summarize, active transportation is really transportation, or what I like to use the word mobility, that's uses one's own power to get around. So that ranges from walking, cycling, rolling in a wheelchair. And also it's important to note that it can be used oftentimes with public transportation. So public transportation, in my opinion, sort of is embedded in the larger picture of active transportation. And why we're kind of moving on with an active transportation master plan now, the city has done, I would say, and Donna, you've seen quite the change in the city in terms of the amount of active transportation and cycling infrastructure that we've created over the last 10 to 12 years. And what I have on screen now is a really good example of a transformational project. This is Bay Street that was recently reconstructed. And you can see sort of the different components that have been incorporated into the overall design of Bay Street. So you have, and just maybe for some of the folks on the board or on the committee, Bay Street originally was a 4-lane, one-directional arterial that really cut off the traditional downtown from the waterfront portion of the downtown. When we reconstructed it a number of years ago, we reduced it from 4 lanes to 2 lanes and used that extra space available to really enhance the pedestrian realm, but also the cycling realm too. So you can see the cycling track on the south side and the sidewalk on the north side. And this is another really good example of a past accomplishment. This is a section of our hub trail on Shannon Road. Again, looking at ways to incorporate different forms of mobility within what we traditionally consider a vehicular street. And again, another really good example is our city's boardwalk, which has a multimodal approach where you have the pedestrian area on the wooden boardwalk, you have the paved pathway along that runs adjacent to the boardwalk. And again, one of the really good things about the boardwalk and the development of active transportation is that it does activate a lot of public spaces. So it not only does it encourage people to get out and ride or walk or get out into the community, but it does have that impact of creating really, really great spaces. And another really positive development in the city and one I think that's quite transformational is the enhancement and development of more mountain biking trails. The city is really becoming a destination for recreational mountain biking trails, and really adding to sort of that quality of life factor of being in Sault Ste. Marie. But while we've done a really good job in a lot of these different sort of areas, if you look at active transportation more as a system, a network of getting around the city by either bike or walking, or if you're taking public transit or if you're in a wheelchair, the system as a whole is disconnected. And there are lots of improvements that we need to start thinking about. And so I thought maybe as a good way to kind of frame the discussion was to kind of take folks through maybe a bit of a contextual analysis. This was a walk that I did recently with my dog, and I thought it was, I was just kind of out and about on my day. And as I was walking, it really, really came to focus the challenges that people that don't use a car have to get around our city. And this is, and why I wanted to kind of focus just on this one neighborhood is really to demonstrate that if one neighborhood is disconnected within the neighborhood itself, as a city as a whole, it's even more challenging to get around by being a pedestrian or a cyclist. So as you can see, this is on People's Road, and we have a sign that says end of sidewalk. So again, one of the things with the active transportation master plan is both for the public, but also the city itself to really recognize that streets are more than just infrastructure to deal with cars. It's really to address all forms of mobility. So again, another example of a sidewalk that just sort of is in a state of disrepair, doesn't sort of lead anywhere. And again, one of the things that we're trying to achieve with the active transportation master plan is to start thinking about the concepts of accessibility and equity. So we have to understand that not everyone can drive or have an option of taking a car. There are residents in our community that do have to walk, that do have to take public transit. And there are facilities, and the facilities they have access to are just not suitable for them to get around. So again, another example, and again, this is, I'm not necessarily trying to harp on the city, but it is, I think it's important that we recognize that some of the infrastructure that we have for active transportation is not to the standard where we can consider it truly equitable or truly accessible.
I just want to jump
Sure.
in here for 2 seconds, Steve, and just also say, which is a focus of this group and what we've been talking about, there is the equitability, if that's the right word, and access, but there's also ensuring that people can make the choice to leave their car at home or to live a car-free lifestyle, which then allows us to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and take more care of the environment, whether they do that every day or whether they do that from time to time or whatever it is. So it's inclusive to folks who need who have mobility challenges and people in general too, but especially for the mobility challenge, certainly.
Yeah, and I was going to sort of summarize at the end, but I think it's an important point. Probably the biggest thing that we want to achieve with this active transportation, we recognize we're a northern community. We recognize for most trips, people are going to take their personal vehicles. But can we create an environment or a network where we at least give people a choice? People have a viable and equitable choice. So people, if they do choose to, leave their car at home, they do have those opportunities to access different points of the community without it being an encumbrance, I guess. So, and I'll try to zip through these because I know I'm cognizant of everyone's time, but another sort of example here. So this is a Penno Drive in the Sherbourne subdivision. So this is one of the streets that I walked on and I checked it out on Google Earth. So again, this is a residential street, but if you kind of look at the way this road was designed. So one of the obvious to me is sort of that flare at the end of the street. So again, really overly accommodating vehicular movements at the expense of all other forms of mobility. So you have a right of way, which is that space between the curbs that really accommodates all the turning movements. So that's why you have this like wider flare at the intersection. A lack of sidewalks. And one of the things that I'll show in a future picture is we have a bus stop here, but really there's no reasonable or feasible way to kind of get to that bus stop. So it sort of defeats the purpose almost of having that bus stop there. So again, another sort of visual of what the street looks like, and you can tell just really devoid of any sort of any sort of facility that would really encourage someone to use a bike or walk on this street. So another example, this is Sherbrooke. And I'm just gonna kind of put it out there, like what are some thoughts when you're looking at this?
Street's super wide.
Yeah.
It's on that one.
And that's another one. Anyone else?
It only has a sidewalk on one side.
Mm-hmm. That's a good observation, actually. Like trees do help sort of create that ambiance that really encourages pedestrian and cycling activity. So yeah, just I think someone mentioned the width of the street. So as a comparison, because I showed Bay Street earlier, Bay Street is only 7 meters. So I guess the question is, why do we need such wide streets in our residential areas? Not only from a space perspective, but, and this is something I think Travis and I have talked about, like in terms of like a materials cost when we're rebuilding these roads, like this is extra asphalt that we have to pour on these roads. So maybe, how we think about these roads needs to change And also in terms of climate change, like asphalt is made with fossil fuels, right? So, you know, if we're actually shrinking the width of the roads, we're actually utilizing less fossil fuels in the construction. And again, this is that picture of the bus stop. So not a really inviting place to catch the bus. And one of the things that we want to encourage is, you know, we want to make active transportation intuitive and efficient, right? We don't want it to be a difficult choice for people to make, right? So, you know, just looking at that in this particular example, you know, it's missing the curb cut, it's missing the connection, and, you know, probably a bus shelter would really sort of augment that user experience as well. So I guess Justin's sort of going to get into the nitty gritty of the active transportation plan and the components of it. But I kind of wanted to give everyone maybe a little bit of context as to kind of the overall existing conditions of Sault Ste. Marie and really the impetus of why we're sort of looking at active transportation more broadly. So we're not just looking at cycling infrastructure, although cycling infrastructure is a key component, but it's an overall way of re-looking at how we build our streets. So on that note, Justin, did you want to take it away?
Sure, yeah. I just need you to stop screen sharing so I can turn mine on. Great, there we go. Okay. Everyone see it okay, yes? Everyone hear me okay, yes? I'm assuming?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thanks so much, Steve, for that valuable context and kind of introduction. You know, I think one of the things that we're always really focused at in our team at WSP is creating excellent user experiences. And I think that, you know, what you showed, Steve, is in large part, you know, areas of the city where the user experience for people walking and cycling has not been considered, right? That sign of, you know, sidewalk ends, you know, you can imagine the howls of outrage if there was a sign that just said road ends and it just stopped in the middle of, you know, of a corridor. For people driving, you know, we need to be considerate of the user experience of all mobility users, and that's exactly what the Active Transportation Master Plan for the city of Sault Ste. Marie is aiming to do. So I'm going to kind of introduce a little bit of the project to the committee here, and then, you know, kind of open it up for a little bit of discussion. And you know, the major thing that I want to emphasize here is we're very much at the introductory level of this project. And we're right now, what we're hoping to do is identify folks that we can reach out to and have some kind of one-on-one or small group conversations to learn more about some of the background in Sault Ste. Marie and get some of those kind of candid conversations about how we can move forward. So I just want to walk through the agenda for my presentation here, just introducing myself and our team. I'll talk through a little bit of the best practices and emerging themes. Highlight our proposed vision and objectives for the plan, talk a little bit about the existing conditions, and we'll get into next steps. So in terms of introductions, you know, I'm the deputy project manager and consultation lead for this assignment, working with Dave McLaughlin, who's our national active transportation manager with WSP. And we're supported by a large number of professionals with expertise from you know, from everything from landscape architecture and trail design to environmental assessments and right down to GIS and engineering technologists. So we're a multidisciplinary team, and we're really aiming to bring a multidisciplinary approach to the active transportation plan for Sault Ste. Marie. So, you know, I think I don't need to go over this too much with this group, but an active transportation master plan is a plan that's designed to support the growth of both the physical and the social infrastructure for walking, cycling, and rolling within the city. So building on those existing multi-use trails and facilities that have already been designed, while also creating more opportunities and connections to encourage residents to use active transportation more not only through the development of a safer and more accessible network, but also through the delivery of new programs and partnerships that are building a cycling and walking culture within the city of Sault Ste. Marie, really trying to give people more of an on-ramp for how they can engage with active transportation and charting a path forward for that. So we started off just by making sure that we're situating the active transportation master plan within the broader policy context. So we reviewed different federal policies, which included things like the National Active Transportation Strategy, the Federal Sustainable Development Strategy, the Transport Canada 2030 plan. Then we got down into the provincial policies and documents. And the reason why we do all of this is because we want to ensure that when we're developing an active transportation master plan, that it's done in alignment with the existing policy structure. We want to ensure that there's a clear line that can be drawn from federal policy to provincial policy to local policy to the active transportation master plan. So we started with that review, and then we got down into, of course, the municipal policies and documents, and we really dug in on the whether it was the official plan and reviewing some of the updates that are proposed, the transportation master plan 2015, the corporate strategic plan, the cycling plan from 2017, which our firm as MMM before we were joined in with WSP performed. And then the City of Sault Ste. Marie Parks and Recreation Master Plan. So, we look at all of the different planning documents that have something to do related to cycling and active transportation. And that's where we really took our kind of lead from when it came to the development of the vision and the objectives, because we want those vision and objective statements that we're creating to speak directly to the other policy goals of the city. So once we completed that policy review, we also wanted to kind of put our heads up and we wanted to take a look around and we wanted to understand what other comparable municipalities are doing and what the trends are. Because when we're developing an active transportation master plan for a city like Sault Ste. Marie, we want to ensure that we're giving you something that's going to be future ready, something that's going to align with best practices. It's going to take the lessons learned from other communities and it's going to apply it in your local context. So the first thing that we did is we went out and we scanned a few comparable municipalities and looked at some of their recent transportation planning documents. So we wanted communities that have a 4 seasons climate with cold winters. We wanted a place that was a similar scale in terms of population geography. We weren't trying to look at, a city with 1 million people or anything like that. We wanted to keep it to a city with a similar scale. And we also wanted cities that were functioning as a regional hub for commercial activities. So based on those criteria, we identified 3 different plans. So the first one that we reviewed was the City of Peterborough's recently approved cycling master plan. So this was approved in 2021. And, the goals for this plan were really to develop what they call an irresistible network. So a network of active transportation that draws people in. So this one was focused specifically on cycling. I will emphasize that. But when we're looking at this, we look at back to that user experience. Encourage year-round riding by prioritizing a winter cycling network, pursuing design excellence and integrating all ages and abilities planning, building a culture of cycling by expanding supports and programs, and go for gold. So establishing the city as a leader in North America. So it's a fairly visionary plan. And the process that we're following is going to be very similar to the process that they followed in Peterborough, which is identifying those existing conditions, undertaking community engagement, establishing visions and goals, identifying those policies and programming, and then creating network development and design guidance. So then we looked a little bit south of the border and we looked at Missoula, Montana. And we looked at their bicycle facilities master plan. And the things about that plan that I really liked was that it explores the community benefits of cycling. It makes it clear what the community has to gain by adding active transportation facilities into their mobility mix. It's clear about the design users for improvements. So what I mean when I say design users is, it's one thing to design cycling infrastructure to accommodate people like me. People that have been riding for a long time that are comfortable riding in some conditions where, you know, more novice riders may not feel comfortable. You know, so their design users are people like children, like seniors, like people with disabilities, people that are in what we would call the interested but concerned population. And then they identified the low-hanging fruit projects. So these were the ones that they could implement immediately, that would have relatively low levels of investment, and that starts to get the ball rolling. Success builds on success. And so that was a really valuable part of the Missoula, Montana plan. And they were careful about when they were identifying those low-hanging fruits. They also coordinated that with resurfacing projects. So really looking at what the city's capital projects were looking at and integrating active transportation into those projects. And then they also identified some of the visionary projects, the big kind of hairy, audacious goals that could be built off of those small wins that they identified. And they analyzed the existing level of traffic stress. So that's a fancy term for saying, like, is that a place that you would want to ride with your kids? Is it a place you'd want to ride by yourself? Is it a place that you wouldn't want to ride by yourself? Or is it a place that you'll avoid like the plague? Those are kind of the 4 levels of traffic stress from 1 to 4. And that's how they examined their network. And then when we looked at the city of Greater Sudbury, so this is a plan, this is the only plan that we reviewed that our firm actually completed. So we wanted to make sure that we were looking to see what other firms were doing in other municipalities. But in Sudbury, you know, that was a plan that we wrote, the Transportation Study Report, and it integrated all forms of mobility into their planning document. The most important part of it was adopting a complete streets approach. And that means whenever they're touching a road, they're always looking to determine, you know, which users and which type of facilities need to be prioritized along that corridor. So rather than starting from, you know, the center line out and assuming that you need to build you know, 2 car lanes in each direction, and then whatever's left over you can put towards walking and cycling. They prioritize building from the edge line in. And so they look at and say, what's the priority for our pedestrian movement here? What's the priority for our placemaking? What's the priority for our cycling movement? And then you take a look and say, well, what do we have left over that we can use for road and automobile space? So they engage with local experts through their Sustainable Mobility Advisory Panel and use those experts to confirm those preferred facility types. So the process was very similar to what we saw in Peterborough, those existing conditions, potential solutions, engagement, and then finally the recommended solutions. The key takeaways from that best practice summary, and these are the pieces that we're going to take forward into the Active Transportation Master Plan into St. Marie, is making sure that we're engaging local stakeholders and organizations early in the development of the plan, hence why I'm sitting here before you today. We want to make sure that we're taking engagement to residents in places they already are, rather than expecting residents to come to us. So that can include online spaces as well, but also physical spaces. So going to places where people are gathering to hear from people that aren't just necessarily the vocal minority on either side of the issue. We all know that there are people that are vocally for active transportation infrastructure and people that are vocally against it. But what we find is that when you go out and you actually speak to kind of the average person, that average person has a much higher degree of support for investing in active transportation than those kind of angry, loud minorities would lead you to believe. It sometimes feels like it's 50-50, but in reality, when we go out and we talk to people, it's more like it's like 75-25 for people that would like to see more investment in active transportation infrastructure. But those voices don't get heard if you're not deliberate about going to where they are. And we want to create plans for all age and abilities facilities. So we really don't want to create just a painted bike lane on a high-speed road. We want to be looking at how we can integrate facilities that are going to make people of all ages and abilities comfortable walking or cycling on those roads. So really meeting those needs that Steve identified in terms of the user types that you want to cater to with new development and reimagining infrastructure. We want to create report materials that are in plain language. We want this stuff to be accessible and easily understandable by the average member of the public so that they can have a sense of accountability as the city moves forward with this plan. And we want to ensure that the maps are a part of that, that they're easy to read and that they show the vision for the plan. So those are kind of the things that we're going to be taking forward into the Active Transportation Master Plan. So some of the emerging themes in terms of mobility that we're looking at for this project, the first one is the complete streets approach. So I've already talked about this, which is really moving towards that outside in approach and considering what value that public space has and how it should be allocated to serve the highest level of public good. I think it's important when we're talking about active mobility to contextualize the fact that our streets are the largest single collection of public space in our communities. If you take our streets and you put the area of our streets all together, they are more public space than all our parks, all our recreation centers, all our other public spaces put together. And when we turn our streets over to one single purpose, and that is to move cars, we are allocating an awful lot of public space to the use of a relatively inefficient form of mobility, and one that is also relatively high in inequity. 30 to 40% of your population in Sault Ste. Marie cannot drive a car. And I'll just let that sink in for a second, because it's a big number. But when you consider that I am talking about children, that I am talking about seniors that are too old to drive, that I'm talking about people with disabilities, that I'm talking about people who cannot afford to drive a car, those numbers consistently come across at 30 to 40%. 30 to 40% of your population is not being served by your public space when it comes to how mobility is prioritized. And so a complete streets approach takes that public space and reconsiders how that street can be utilized and what that public space can do in terms of the value it can provide to your community. Vision Zero, has anyone in the room heard of Vision Zero? Hands up if you have. Yes, no? Yes, we have a couple. Okay. So Vision Zero is a growing approach that originated in Sweden. And the idea behind Vision Zero is that fatalities are not an acceptable byproduct of mobility. That every fatality on our roadways is preventable, and that the only number of deaths that are acceptable on our roadways is 0. And what Vision Zero really does is it looks at a system-wide approach. It assumes that people are going to make mistakes. It assumes that there are going to be errors made by humans because humans make errors. And what Vision Zero does is it prioritizes the types of infrastructure systems that account for human error and reduce the likelihood that when a mistake occurs, a death is a result. And so this can be things like reducing corner radii to reduce vehicle speeds as they go around corners. It can be things like reducing speed limits and narrowing lane widths to reduce vehicle speeds. It can be things like reducing the number of vehicle lanes on a given corridor so that there is more predictability in how vehicles are moving. So it really is it's a systems-wide approach that looks at every single place where high injury collisions tend to occur and applies a systems-wide approach to rectifying some of those conditions. Part of what we've already talked about here is the idea of transportation equity. I've already touched on it a little bit, but just to highlight that roadways that are designed exclusively for cars are by definition inequitable. The cost of owning and operating a car in Canada in 2016 was $9,800 a year, and that's from the CAA, and that cost has only continued to rise. So you can imagine that for someone working a minimum wage job, having to carry those costs bites quite significantly into their household budget. So we want to ensure that at every stage of what we're doing here with this active transportation master plan, that we're considering the impacts on communities that have been previously marginalized. And those equity deserving communities like women, Indigenous people and people of color, low-income adults, people with disabilities, those are the types of folks that we really want to consider in every decision we're making with the active transportation master plan to allow them to have a higher degree of mobility and access to their community. And then finally, micromobility, and this is an emerging trend that's really kind of popping up everywhere. all over North America, and that's the rise of these small electric powered vehicles like e-bikes and e-scooters. So it can be whether they are shared or whether they are private. These are really the kinds of things that are starting to show up all over the place, and we want to ensure that the city has a policy structure in place to ensure that there are safe use of these vehicles as they start to roll out on the roads in the city. I'm almost done, I promise. I'm not going to go on for too much longer here, but I just want to talk really quickly about the vision and objectives. And I'll share, I think these slides have been shared out, but we're looking at a number of different vision statements, and we'll be refining these as we go. So I invite you to take a look at them after the meeting and provide some feedback on which one you like best. But we're aligning our vision statement again with the city's previous planning documents. So we're looking at things that center the importance of the hub trail, that center the importance of accessibility, of safety, of sustainability, and of lifestyle. And those are really the elements and the language that we've found throughout the city's existing planning documents. And so that's how we're trying to really make sure that we're tying the active transportation master plan and its objectives directly back to the city's previously approved planning documents. And then to support some of those visions, we're also looking at more detailed objectives. And these objectives are going to be essentially kind of the guiding principles as we go forward with the active transportation master plan. So, enhancing safety and accessibility, creating opportunities for education and encouragement, enhancing connectivity, and building transportation equity into the decision-making process. Those are the things that are going to be our guiding objectives as we go forward. At least in draft, we're still open to, we're still kind of open to feedback on the vision and objectives here at this point. So in terms of existing conditions, I think Steve largely covered a lot of it off, but just to highlight that, there are 378 kilometers of sidewalks, there's 74 kilometers of off-road trails, there's 27 kilometers of the hub trail, and there's 43 kilometers of spoke routes that, would have cycling facilities or other types of facilities on them. So we're not starting from nothing. We're not starting from scratch here in Sault Ste. Marie. And I think that that's a really positive thing for us to start with, is that, we are starting from a place where there have been investments already made in active transportation infrastructure in Sault Ste. Marie. But as, as Steve highlighted, and as we've started to see in our review of the existing infrastructure, when it comes to the all ages and abilities networks that exist within the community, those are the places where it's really lacking. Routes may end, routes may not kind of meet the standard of what we would call an all ages and abilities connection. And so people end up being pushed outside their comfort zone on facilities, and then they choose to go back to their car, because the moment people feel like they are in danger, that is the moment that they decide that it is not for them to walk, bike, or wheel. So as we start to go forward, we're looking at developing a network that's based on our route selection criteria. So we're looking at safety and accessibility. We're looking at creating connected, continuous networks. We're looking at ones that are feasible. We don't want to identify projects that are going to, blow the whole city budget for one single project. We want to ensure that there's alignment with those capital projects. We want to support the multimodal needs of the city, connecting to transit and providing both pedestrian and cyclist space. And we want to connect to key destinations. And so we've started to, we've confirmed our existing conditions mapping, where we've got essentially all of the city's cycling and multi-use trails. And then we also have all of the existing and previously proposed pedestrian networks all mapped out. So we've got a pretty clear sense of where the infrastructure is and where it isn't in the city. And we're going to start using our spatial analysis techniques to identify some of the priority gaps within those networks, where we'll be able to then start to recommend kind of infill projects. So in terms of next steps, for route selection, we're really at the existing conditions and opportunities phase right now. where we're aiming to identify the existing and previously proposed routes and that route selection criteria. From there, we're going to get on to identifying gaps in candidate routes. We're going to be coming out to Sault Ste. Marie for some field work and some engagement to verify those candidate routes and ensure that they're feasible. And then we'll refine the proposed facility type. So we'll ensure that what's being recommended is going to meet that all agenability standard. And then finally, once we've got the network confirmed, then we move on into phasing and we identify, what's the short, medium, and long-term priorities for the city. So how do we create those short-term connected minimum grid networks that are going to provide people the connectivity that's going to encourage them to get out of their cars and start traveling more on foot, by bike, or on wheels. So we've already produced 2 discussion papers. So one's the policy review and one's the best practices review. And the way that we're going to be structuring this project is we're going to be releasing discussion papers for community review. And this will just kind of help keep the project moving in bite-sized phases rather than dropping, a 100-page document onto the project website and saying, here's the plan. Our objective is to release these discussion papers, which will be a little bit shorter, anywhere between kind of 8 to 10 pages, highly graphic, and with lots of images and information in them, but doing so in a way that's kind of bite-sized. And then at the end of the project, each of these discussion papers will then be just taken, compiled together, and created into a 1 chapter of the Active Transportation Master Plan. And then that's what ends up getting published. And that's it for me. So I'm happy to kind of field any questions. I know that was kind of like drinking from a fire hose, but the biggest thing that I want to encourage you all to do is now, you have my email from the invite to the meeting here, and we'd really like to know who are the folks that we should be reaching out to, who are the key players in Sault Ste. Marie that we should be talking to as we start to build our engagement strategy. And what are the key concerns that you as a committee have, knowing what you know about the city's existing structure and history?
Hi, Justin. Can I go first or not?
Andre, just hang on 1 second, okay? What I want to do is put a little bit of structure to this part of the conversation. So I'd like to ask that if you have questions or comments for Justin, can we first of all cover anything at a high level that's in the slides that he presented? I don't want to, I want to assure everyone that the plan is to, as you can see from his slides, we are here at the beginning and we'll be involved in the process all the way along. And so we want to allow time for that to happen. However, get our heads into these various different discussion papers. There's a lot of information here, but at a high level, based on what Justin told us and what Steve told us, what comments do you have or questions for Justin? And so go ahead, Andre.
Okay, my first is definitely a high level question. In my presentation, in my review of what works to create modal shifts, economic incentives were always incorporated in Europe, particularly. And I'll give you an example, and I don't see this included in your presentation. Say, for example, you're going to a hockey rink or a swimming pool. You don't have to pay to park, yet that parking lot costs money, yet you pay to go in to swim. So that's already favoring the motorists, and everybody else, the 30 or 40% who don't drive, have to pay to go swimming. So what does your plan is actually looking at how intrinsic incentives to drive are built into everything we do. So my example is, why should it be that you should pay to park and maybe go in to swim for free? This way, we're really encouraging people not to drive, and all the effective modal shifts in Europe had economic incentives built into them, and I don't see you addressing any of that.
Can I just want to ask this question in a slightly different way, Andre, to Justin and to Steve. So is that type of municipal policy part of what is covered under the scope of what you're doing here?
I would say in general that would be outside the scope of an active transportation master plan, Andre. And you know, I mean, I think you probably know from your, you know, kind of interaction and experience with me in the past that like you know, you're preaching to the choir here on this kind of stuff. I think that would be more appropriate at the level of like a transportation master plan or a parking strategy or even a sustainability strategy. I think that there are certainly elements that we can incorporate into our active transportation master plan when it comes to the encouragement and education side about different ways that the city could provide incentives for people that walk or bike to city facilities or those kinds of things. But I mean, you know, trying to tackle the embedded subsidization of private car storage at every single area in the city, whether it's, you know, downtown where if there's free parking in the downtown area, or when you drive to the grocery store or to Walmart. I mean, that's way beyond the scope of an active transportation master plan. But we can certainly look at different ways that we can incentivize and encourage the city to reduce those barriers and shift some of that incentive over to people walking and cycling.
Okay, can I have just one more question? And it's totally different than this. It's basically right now the city is looking at planning Queen Street, and I wanted to understand how well. And so far, there's been no accommodations for cyclists being planned in that. And Queen Street downtown is probably the key place where everything you've outlined is necessary, and it's not there. So I was wondering if the active transportation master plan is going to get involved in the Queen Street design planning exercise.
Maybe I'll answer that, and just for the sake of the group, you know, and I just want to be clear, Andre, we are still at a very conceptual stage of the Queen Street design. Nothing has been solidified. We are still open to suggestions and exploring design ideas. So, you know, it's not going unheeded. We are taking some time, and we are going to be considering what cycling infrastructure or amenities can be incorporated in the Queen Street project. It does have some challenges, and like the active transportation plan itself, the solution to Queen Street may not just be what we do on Queen Street. It could be what we do sort of within the entire downtown as well. So, and parking might be part of that solution as well. So I see the Queen Street issue that you raised is a much more broader, holistic issue that needs to be looked at on the downtown level, not just on Queen Street. So, but we are investigating other options as well. So,
Andre, your question about subsidy or subsidization, I want to make sure that we carry it forward, not necessarily for this purpose as we talked about, because it's a bit out of scope, but we do want to remember that it's part of something that we can consider as municipal policy or discuss as potential municipal policy or whatever. So
just on that though, and what I wanted to touch on is we are starting to look at revisiting our parking standards, like as a whole across the community. So one of that might be, part of that might be a discussion on the cost of parking or subsidizing parking. We're not there yet, but we are starting to think about how as a city we can rethink about how people provide parking or how developments provide parking, the city being one of those stakeholders. So
okay, thanks, Steve. Thanks, Andre. Questions from anyone else? Pedro?
I have a couple of quick questions for Justin. So one first comment for the messaging as to why we are doing this for people. We're doing this, yes, it's a healthier lifestyle, but we're doing this active transportation and changing our cities because there's a climate emergency, and every city in the world has a role to play. And I think it's important for people to understand that as part of the disincentivation of utilizing a personal vehicle. There's a responsibility. Alongside with that, I do agree with Andre that there has to be side-by-side policies that disincentivize using the car with parking and with speed limits and that go hand in hand with the active transportation system. So then my two questions. One is that I see in the plan, some parts were missed there, and that's getting too much into the weeds. Like, for example, Great Northern Road and Queen Street. I'd like to know more about it, but we'll do that later. But one question that I have is about connectivity, but the transportation plan almost piggybacks into the present roadways, and that creates problems. Even our hub trail is not completed, and it has areas, for example, you have to cross, if you're riding a bike on several spots, you have to cross major streets. You have to cross third line. There's like 4 lanes of traffic. There's no bridge. And that's an example because they're not completely disconnected. They crisscross all over the place. So that's one question. How do we deal with that? The other question is our opportunity for change. The best opportunity for change is our younger generations, right? So schools, I don't see a lot of youth utilizing bicycles, getting to school on bikes, because parents probably are also concerned for a number of reasons, too many cars and other reasons. So how do we also incorporate connectivity of schools within the city into these roadways for bikes and other active transportation tools that vehicles that people use that don't necessarily crisscross with the major traffic? Sorry, there's a lot here, but those are the two main questions.
Yeah. So I think both of those are really valid things that we're going to be taking into account, Pedro. And the first question about where the gaps are, et cetera. I mean, that is really going to be a priority for us to identify those gaps and create kind of a quick wins scenario under which those gaps get filled. And so whether that is through new construction or through the utilization of existing assets in a different way, we'll absolutely be looking at that. We know that the continuity of a network is really vital to ensure that people feel safe and comfortable using it, right? It doesn't matter how short a distance it is that people feel like their life is in danger. If it's 10 meters, that's enough for people to choose not to use that route. When it comes to the schools and some of those other key community destinations are going to be a central focus of our evaluation of the network, really determining where those community destinations already exist, and then defining how we move forward with that.
So just to maybe piggyback on that question, you're right. That is one of the challenges of trying to plan any kind of active transportation facility in the city. We have a legacy of a car-dominated built form. And there are times, you're right, where if you need to walk to a school, you got to cross a major intersection. I think what we want to achieve with this plan going forward is, how do we convert those spaces so it doesn't feel overwhelming or unsafe? So the active transportation master plan hopefully will provide a guide for the city and the development industry to create a built form that isn't overwhelming to the active transportation users. So it is a big paradigm shift. It's going to require a lot of buy-in. It's going to require a lot of education, both from the city and residents as a whole, because I think one of the fundamental things, and Justin touched upon it, and that concept of a complete street, it really redefines how a street feels, right? It's looking at more of just the function, but really how do you feel on that street? And it is a very different design methodology that the city will need to embrace. And we do have that legacy, but hopefully with the approval of the active transportation master plan, if and when we're redoing these streets, or perhaps we're able to prioritize some of these streets, convert them into a safer, more user-friendly for all mobility users, so they feel comfortable on those spaces. So you're right, we do have that legacy though.
You have other questions?
No, it's
Good,
good.
okay. Anyone else with questions? No, I don't see any. I have a couple of comments, just quickly. I as well was concerned about the idea that we're doing this to, do our part for the environment, if you will. And I do notice that in the draft vision statements, the word sustainable is there, and I don't know if sustainable is inclusive of environmental or if that was the intention, but that's just a comment. I completely agree with Pedro on what he said there. And I wondered whether it belongs in the objectives or in the vision somehow, really like stating, and it might be inherent in, although objectives tend to be more specific, and I'm not reading this specifically, but is to increase usage and increase transit ridership, these kinds of things that should come out of these changes that we make. Increase the number of, they may be sort of further down but they would be, to me, they would be an objective, which is, how are we going to get more people using public transit because we undertake these investments? How are we going to get more people walking and using pedestrian means or whatever because we undertake these investments? How are we going to be able to reduce the time it takes for us to achieve our greenhouse gas emission goals because we undertake these objectives? Like really specific things that we can target, that then we can obviously measure, that justify for the people that have to make the decisions about the money that gets invested, that justify these investments. Okay, so I might have gone down the road a little bit too far, but I just like to see.
Yeah, and I think, and Justin, maybe you can speak to this, but one of the goals or one of the deliverables we hope to have with this active transportation master plan is a monitoring mechanism. So you're right, there's no sense of really developing a plan if you can't measure its success over the long term, right? And more we're seeing that it's not just sort of my opinion we should be doing this, you really have to back it up with data, right? So we are going to be building in a monitoring plan as part of the active transportation master plan as well. Like some of those things I think can be kind of webbed into the objectives, but to kind of get those more definitive metrics, it's probably more in the implementation monitoring section of the active transportation master plan.
But it could go to design as well, right? Like if we have robust goals around increasing usage, then that goes to design, which is part of what we're talking about here. So
yeah.
So that's those were the things I wanted to add. Emily? Oh, Travis.
Oh, sorry. I just thought about this recently, but when we're looking at accessibility, just one thought similar to the schools, looking at the nodes, is trails like the Hub Trail, looking at like non-conventional sidewalks and looking at where we have senior housing. Pathways on Trunk and Shannon is a prime example. Those individuals, presumably, if they've got a cane or a wheelchair or what have you, if it's motorized, struggle on regular sidewalks. And then, if I recall correctly, I don't think that there's a sidewalk on Shannon closest to their facility. So it really limits their ability to go out and actually participate in society, right? So might be something worth looking at is where we have these seniors' homes. And
that's a good point, just to sort of like connect or sort of make the connection between these destinations or keynotes like a senior's home or other things like a tourism destination, and kind of seeing if there are those gaps in the network too. So that is probably the next aspect of our evaluation, is to identify those gaps based on where we want people to kind of get to and from. So we will be looking at that, but I think it's I think it's easy to recognize schools or places of tourism destinations and things like that. But if there are other destinations that the committee feels are important, definitely raise that, and we can sort of include that in our analysis.
The Cara, the Cara communities another example.
Yeah,
Of
places like
of
that, for
places,
sure.
you know, where there's high use
Yeah.
of accessibility, and it's really tough for folks, so
So-
keep that in mind.
Yeah.
And can I just mention something briefly? I think that in the design phase, when it comes to the engagement, the surveys of our community and population groups, hopefully if it's done correctly, you can see some of these trends come out, where you can decision analysis this and cost benefit and figure out what are those low hanging fruits, as Justin said,
Mhm.
and make our dollars spread and affect many more people, engage many more people on this success, build success, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Okay.
So I do want to add one thing. I know we want to wrap this section up, and I know we're at over our time for this. And I'm not going to steal this for you, but to reiterate, we have time at our next meeting to go into more feedback on what's been provided to everybody here. And I think I've spoken to you about this, even it touches upon what Donna, it touches upon what Pedro brought up. In the policy review, we're missing the GHG reduction plan. So that's definitely an important city document unanimously passed by council that has a target of net zero emissions. So it's important that that is part of the policy review. You can't have a net zero target without addressing active transportation. You're doing this plan, we have this target, it's got to be embedded in there a little bit more. Also, like the objectives, I see what Donna was saying and the vision, like sustainability is mentioned, but we are in a climate emergency. This is something that needs to be brought forward. Ideas at the top of my head, and I'm just cognizant of time here. We can talk about this more next month, but maybe looking at a discussion paper on the environment, the environmental aspect, or incorporating an objective that addresses that. This is a priority that's been approved by council, and this is a prime opportunity to address it. So there are the documents to review. I recommend that we save our feedback for those for the next meeting.
Yeah, I just, all I'll say, because we need to move on here. I want to bring your attention forward, please, to the package that you received, which does address the engagement list. Okay, so there's a community engagement list there, a proposed list. And then there's, when's the intention to send out the survey? Like, are we on a timeline on this, or can we just?
We're right now, we're exploring sort of the method or the tool that we use to do the engagement. We're exploring like an online platform. Sort of the one option would be to use our city website.
No, I'm sorry, Steve. No, I'm just wondering, do we have time, do you want the feedback from this group on the engagement list and the survey questions before, within a certain timeline?
Yeah, I would say if we can sort of get some feedback on the survey and the engagement list, like within the next couple of weeks.
Okay. So if you could take a little bit of time, just review if there's any glaring, omissions or anything that you think should be added in terms of the survey or whatever, without getting too much in the weeds, but just if there's anything greatly there, then please share that information with Emily, who will share it with the required folks. Okay. And I think we're in lots of time for the whole website thing, right? Yeah, that's not happening yet. Okay. All right. So thank you, Justin. Appreciate
I'll just say my thanks too. I think it's really valuable for us to have those perspectives, and we'll commit to weaving in more of those sustainability and climate change objectives into the project.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I am going to now go to another meeting. And Jamie's going to take over chairing the meeting, and we're moving on to item 6, which is the application for the Green Initiatives Fund from the Conservation Authority, and Karina Barrett is here to speak to that. So thank you, Jamie, for taking over. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Donna.
You're welcome.
Jamie, this is your first time chairing, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
That's right. And first time in person. So how opportune. So this is the agenda item number 7 now, seeing as you move things around. The Green Initiative Fund application review from the Conservation Authority for LA. So I could give you a review on that, and then we open it up to questions. Karina Barrett from the Conservation Authority, General Manager, is with us today, who can go into more detail on the application. So I'll ask you to start the conversation.
Excellent. Thank you for being here today.
My pleasure. Sorry for being here.
Yeah, no, I hope you enjoyed some of the discussion on the transportation master plan.
Pretty often.
Yeah, so I understand you've made an application for a Green Initiatives Program Fund, and it's quite a comprehensive package, looking to do some updates for some LED lighting and infrastructure facilities. Yeah, so Emily, at this point, would you like to review some of the
Sure.
information?
Yeah, thanks Jamie, thanks Karina. So again, Conservation Authority has submitted an application to the Green Initiatives Fund for review. This falls under the energy efficiency pillar, the pillars of the fund. Specifically, they underwent an assessment by the Provincial Small Business Lighting Program. The program covers $2,000 for LED lighting upgrades. Anything else above that, the organization has to pay. So some of the project is covered by the incentive program. The portion that they're here, Sabrina is here today to discuss is the areas that are not covered. So this is a pretty straightforward project. They're going to replace their existing incandescent, more energy consumption oriented lighting to LED. It is expected that the energy savings from this project are actually quite decent. They're looking to save approximately $1,300 a year, and they're going to reduce their energy consumption by approximately 62% based on the existing fixtures. This is an electricity project, but it also aligns with the GHG reduction pillar of the project plan as well. So pretty straightforward. They're looking for financial assistance as a nonprofit in the community to cover the additional share of the project. With that, I'll turn it over to Karina and ask if there's anything else that you'd like to add about the summary.
Sure. I'm not sure if everybody's aware of kind of the plight of conservation authorities recently, but back in 2019, we did have our flooding portion of our funding cut by 50%. So we've actually had to reallocate. That program used to be 100% covered by the provincial government. Now we have to use some of our self-generated funds in order to continue making sure that the city is receiving the flood control that it deserves. And so as a result, some of our more, some of those projects that we had on the back burners, such as updating lighting, updating some of the infrastructure around the building itself. The building itself was built in the 1980s, and the last time the lighting was looked at was well over 10 years ago. So all of the ballasts that we currently have are actually obsolete. We can't even get replacement light bulbs for them anymore. And we're, very hopeful that we can work with the city in order to try and move this forward. So I'm happy to answer any questions or anything like that that anybody might have.
Okay, so we'll put it out to the group if anyone has any questions for Karina on the application. Pretty straightforward. I had a question around the facilities that you identified in here.
Sure.
So you talked about your office building and garage lighting, as well as your sugar shack, right?
Yeah.
What the sugar shack threw me off a little bit. Could you
So-
explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so our sugar shack, also known as our classroom, it's a community area that people can rent out if they would like to for well, the Kiwanis will do pancake breakfast there in the fall this year, as well as in the spring. And then it's also available to the public to be able to use as a meeting space as they need. It has a kitchen facility as well as seating areas. It can hold up to 200 people. And so we often rent it out to different associations that we work closely with, such as the Warrior Trail. We have the Rag and Gun Club. We have local foresters who use the area. As well as Girl Guides, Boy Scouts, and then anybody who wants to have, say, a birthday party or a Christmas party or something like that. So the ballasts in that room are probably the worst. You can hear a very distinct humming whenever the lights are on, and they don't all come on. So it would be nice to be able to we had recently done some work in that room because we unfortunately had a leak about a year and a half ago from our roof. So we were able to replace that. We were able to buff the room up a bit, but the lighting is still kind of an eyesore at this point. In addition to that, the energy savings that we would receive, I'm actually just working on our budget right now, and the amount that we are paying for utilities at this point is astronomical. So we have done some upgrades. We've switched over to some gas for our shop, so that it's been piped straight from the building. So we've seen some efficiency there. This would definitely help boost that for us and help see some of our self-generating funds go more towards programming as opposed to infrastructure upgrades.
Okay, wonderful, thank you.
Thank you.
And I did a little bit of a back of the napkin calculation, looks like 0.3 tons CO2.
Well, thank you for that. I wasn't even really sure how to start that.
Just because the grid in Ontario is so efficient. with the hydro, right? We're in Alberta. So that's very interesting. So at this point, I guess, do we go for a vote?
So,
Emily?
but we
The
do have a
resolution?
resolution drafted for this meeting, so we are looking for a vote, so you go ahead, read it, ask for.
Unless there's any more questions,
And
we'll just
second.
pause and check one more time. All right, well, be it resolved that the Environmental Sustainability Committee supports the, oh, no, am I not, that's right. Can I get a mover for
You
approving
can read the
this?
resolution and then ask for a mover and second.
Okay, great. Be it resolved that the Environmental Sustainability Committee supports the request for funding from the CDF, the Green Initiative Stream, in the amount of $5,792.38 for Sault Ste. Marie Region Conservation Authority LED lighting upgrade project and recommends that council approve the request. Anybody can move for that? Thanks. Throw.
Roz, Andre?
Okay. All in favor?
Awesome. Thank you guys very much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Karina.
Thank you.
You can feel Rita.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I truly appreciate it. And I'm really sorry for coming a little bit early.
Oh, that's okay.
I didn't mean to rush anything.
They're public meetings, so you're like,
Okay,
come
perfect.
anytime.
Okay, cool. I'll remember that.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Karina.
You guys have a great day. Thank
You
you so
too.
much.
Okay, so on to the next one. Emily, this is the staff update, if I'm not mistaken, all over the place. I wrote 1, 2, 3 for jumping around the agenda.
Yeah,
Did I miss something?
actually, we do have one point, which is a quick update
yeah.
regarding our 2022 project priorities working group. This is just going to be a verbal update on my end. So as a reminder, there's 3 projects that we've prioritized as a committee for this year. The first was the active transportation piece. I will add to the committee members, this working group had actually developed a survey to go to the community and get some insights regarding access to trails, accessibility for active transportation. We provided this to the planning department, and they have actually taken the questions that we designed in this survey and incorporated them in the survey that they have established with WSP. So we've been a part of that. We've also actually created copy, so writing for the city's active transportation webpage, which is extremely new at present. So we can have a little bit more information, act as a bit of a one-stop shop. So this is a work in progress. The second piece, which I'm sure maybe some of you have seen out and about that's underway, is the patch basin painting project that's being undertaken by the city. This is ongoing, and I hope to have a bit more of a comprehensive update on that for you at our next meeting. When you're driving around town, take a look. You might see some of them. They're actually coming to fruition, which is very exciting. And of course, we know that the project of adding a green pillar to the Green Initiatives Fund was already approved by council. So this working group, maybe by the end of the year, we'll be able to wrap it up. So that's it for that piece, Amy. Okay, I'm happy to continue
Please continue.
with the staff update. Okay, so we have 5 minutes to go, and let's see if I can keep with my record. Oh, I guess I have to share my screen. So just a note for everybody in the agenda package, which I know is quite heavy. This is just a summary of some of the things that we'll be talking about. We were hoping to talk about today, but we didn't really get to, that we'll be talking about in our next meeting. Things to review for the active transportation master plan, and I'll follow up with you. So I wanted to highlight some of the great work that the committee has done this year with regards to the Green Initiatives Fund. This was, I had caveated this list of 10 that we were still pending approval of the Conservation Authority project. but of course, this has just been approved. So we had 10 projects, 4 are complete. We have some funds left in the committee, and I will say we have a couple more projects in the hopper for our next meeting, so things are moving quite well. But I did want to highlight a couple of the impacts so far from some of our projects. So the YMCA Hydroponic Tower Garden project, you may recall that we approved earlier this year for 3 towers. These towers have actually started sprouting. They've been installed in the child care centers, and they've established programming and lesson plans for the children who attend. So we've got a snapshot here of some of the sprouts that are starting to grow, which is really cool. The downtown bag and green chips project was executed with the distribution of 1,500 usable shopping bags to retailers in the community, as well as an information rack card established by Clean North. Another initiative that took place over the summer was the Shoreline cleanup project. Quite a few people came out to this. They had 93 people who came in person. There were others who attended on their own accord, but we've got some great images of some smiling people here with their biodegradable bags that were purchased as part of the project. Some key impacts here: over 1,400 cigarette butts were collected along the shores. That's quite a bit. How did we count them? They counted them. They had tally sheets as part of the project. 354 pieces of plastic and 238 styrofoam pieces. So those are some pretty high numbers, and that's just in what they were able to tally. And there were some people who participated but didn't use the tally sheets. They just wanted to highlight that. Also, the invasive species workshop has been executed. This was a great project to build awareness about invasive species in the community. A distribution of some resource guides, red maple saplings, native flower seeds, and hand shovels were shared. They did have some remaining resources left over, and they donated these to the Sault Ste. Marie Public Library for public use and access. And their post-workshop survey showed a lot of excitement and interest in attendees to continue in their own gardens, looking at native species more specifically. So that's just a snapshot on the Green Initiatives Fund, more updates to come. Moving over to the Community Retrofit Financing Feasibility Study. We approved this project last year, recommended it to Council, and we've gone through some stages, which I'll highlight shortly. Just as a reminder, this project is going to look at the establishment of a community efficiency financing program to increase uptake in home energy retrofits in Sault Ste. Marie. So just an update on the timeline. This was recommended by this committee last September, just a little over a year ago. It was approved by Council to apply in November. We applied to the funder in December. We received funding approval in May, and we released an RFP in June. We've selected a vendor, we've had our kickoff, and we're hoping to have this project complete by early 2023. This is an exciting project that the committee thought would be of value, and I'm happy to see it progressing forward. I look forward to sharing results with all of you as it progresses. I also wanted to highlight the Power of Parking Reform webinar that we had last week. Very well attended. We had 71 people register, 43 people showed up, and I got a lot of really positive feedback from the community. It was interesting to hear Steve today mention that the city is starting to look at its parking standards, and I will be following up with the planning department on that. I just wanted to highlight as well that if you weren't able to attend, there's a recording of the webinar embedded in this PowerPoint, as well as all of the sustainability webinars that we've hosted over the past couple of years. Shared resources were quite heavy this month, so I encourage you all to check it out. Lots going on, from wildfires to what's happening in Pakistan, as well as the droughts on the other side of the spectrum in China. So it's, again, every day we're seeing things. So check these out. They're shared not only by committee members, but members of the community who send me resources as well. Our next committee meeting is next month, October 13th. Again, this will be available in Zoom or in person, whatever you prefer. And our spotlight will be Fred Post from Algoma Steel, Manager of Environmental Control. So that is it on my end. I think we're a little bit over time. Happy to answer questions if anybody has.
No questions from me. I know we are 1 minute over. That was impressive, as usual.
So with that, we can move to adjournment.
Well, then we'll move. Can I have a mover to adjourn and close our meeting? Thank you. And a seconder, Eric. Thanks. All in favor, I guess.
Excellent. Thanks, everybody. We will see you next month.
Oh, I think Pavna wants to.
No, she's, I think
I
that's
think
enough.
she's had hers.
Okay.
I was saying all in favor.
Oh, thanks, Ron.